The Galar region is one of the most rich and biodiverse regions in terms of catching Pokemon. Of course, of such a large pool of Pokemon to catch, some are bound to give you more of a fight than others. Today, we're going to be going over the top 10 hardest Pokemon to catch in Sword and Shield. While catching Pokemon is heavily dependent on the Pokemon's catch rate, we will also be considering when and where these Pokemon can be caught and how common or rare it is to find them. So if you guys are ready, let's hop into the top 10 hardest Pokemon to catch in Pokemon Sword and Shield. To start off this list, we have a couple of absolute beasts when it comes to Pokemon. These Pokemon are Jangmo-o for Sword and Larvitar for Shield. These Pokemon earn this spot on this list for a plethora of reasons. Firstly, they have a catch rate of 45, which means that any unprepared trainer is going to have a tough time. But that is not the most important part, as most mons on this list share that catch rate. What solidifies these two at number 10 is their abundance. At the Lake of Outrage, during either overcast or intense sun, these two Pokemon have a 5% chance of being randomly encountered in the grass. Additionally, during a sandstorm in the right place, you have a 2% chance of a random encounter. These may not seem all that high, but compared to other Pokemon on this list, they are the most abundant for their catch rate. Oh, and a side note, during that Lake of Outrage sandstorm, there's also a 2% chance of either finding Hakumo or Pupitar in the overworld, so that also helps to placing them here at number 10. Up next here is a clear favorite of mine, Eevee. Similar to our last set of Pokemon, Eevee also has a catch rate of 45, but unlike the last set, Eevee can only be found on Route 4 1% of the time. That is abysmally low for any Pokemon, but there are a couple things that alleviate this a bit. First, this 1% spawn is during all weather conditions, meaning you won't have to wait for random weather to be on your side. Second, it is an overworld spawn, meaning you can see when it appears and just make a beeline for it. Something else to note is that most Pokemon on this list will likely be obtained at higher levels. Eevee, however, will be obtained around level 14, meaning you can pick it up early game, or if you're already late game, you should probably bring False Swipe along. Now it's time for everybody's favorite new dragon Pokemon, Dreepy. With a catch rate of 45, it's about in line with everything else we have seen so far. This like our number 10 slot, this little guy can be found at Lake of Outrage, and will be a random grass encounter. During thunderstorm and heavy fog, Dreepy has a 2% chance of being found. When it is overcast, that chance becomes 1%. Additionally, during either overcast or rain, Dracloak, the evolution of Dreepy, has a 1% chance to spawn in the overworld, which is always nice to have more options. Something else to add is that the weather condition of heavy fog requires that you beat the champion before it starts appearing in rotation. In the number 7 slot, we have quite a few Pokemon that all feel pretty similar in terms of finding and catching them. These Pokemon are Ditto in Sword, Gumi in Shield, Rotom in both games, and Mimikyu also in both games. Mimikyu is a bit of an outlier here, but all consideration places it equal with the other Pokemon in the 7th slot. All the Pokemon in this slot have a catch rate of, you guessed it, 45. Ditto, Gumi, and Rotom all share the same location, Lake of Outrage. Additionally, these three all share the same weather and spawn chance. 2% in the rain for Ditto and Gumi, 2% in a thunderstorm for Zweilous and Sliggoo, the evolutions of Ditto and Gumi, and 2% in both rain and thunderstorms for Rotom. Mimikyu, unlike the others, spawns in Giant Smear during heavy fog 3% of the time. Doing the math, the difference is negligible, that it would have not felt right giving Mimikyu its own slot. Oh, and one more thing, out of all the Pokemon in this slot, Rotom is the only one that is visible on the overworld. The rest are random grass encounters. Finally, a Pokemon not listed with a catch rate of 45. Mantine takes our 6th slot, and this one is an odd one to discuss as to why it's here. This Pokemon is actually the reason why this list had to start considering other factors aside from just catch rate. Mantine boasts an impressively low catch rate of 25, but gets no further on this list for one reason: abundance. Remember when I mentioned how Jangmo-o and Larvitar were the most abundant for their catch rate of 45? Well, if you surf across the Lake of Outrage, Mantine will pop up about 65% of the time, in just about any weather also. This thing is the Rattata of the water in terms of how common it is. On top of that, it can be found elsewhere. You can find it surfing on Route 9 25% of the time, and even when surfing at Monostoke Riverbank about 5% of the time. You're probably wondering why this thing settles in number 6 and not like the number 10 slot, if it's so dang common to find. Well, the math that was done to determine placement has more weight and emphasis on catch rate, since that was deemed more valuable and made for a list that makes more sense. Perhaps the most important Pokemon for breeding is also one of the toughest to catch. Ditto makes this list with a very solid 35 catch rate, making it slightly easier to catch than Mantine. Similar to Mantine, Ditto can also be found in the Lake of Outrage, but unlike Mantine, it can be found in any weather as a 10% spawn in the overworld, or a 2% in the grass, both significantly lower spawn rates than that of Mantine any day. Also, it is important to watch what Pokemon you bring, since Ditto will transform at the first opportunity. Speaking of transforming, something you won't need to concern yourself with is messing with the catch rate. Prior to Generation 5, Ditto would take on all properties of the opposing Pokemon, including catch rate, but since then, Ditto has always had a fixed catch rate at 35, transformed or not. So when going out for a Ditto, bring whatever you want, preferably something to really mess with. So far on this list, most Pokemon have been released prior to Sword and Shield, not really giving us any kind of Generation 8 love or representation. In comes Indeedee, a Pokemon introduced in Sword and Shield that is definitely no slouch when it comes to being difficult to catch. This Pokemon has a set catch rate of 30, making it an exceptionally hard catch. Also, can you guess where you can catch this Pokemon? It's Lake of Outrage. I swear, every Pokemon and their mother hangs out here. I don't know why. Anywho, during Heavy Fog at the Lake of Outrage, Indeedee has a 14% encounter rate in the grass. If that place isn't your cup of tea, Glenwood Tango is also home to Indeedee, around 5% of the time in all weather. Another thing to consider is that Indeedee has gender differences in abilities and moveset, so be sure to figure out which gender you might need before you invest a bunch of Pokeballs into the wrong one. In our number 3 slot, we have a Pokemon from our last video who is deemed the rarest Pokemon in Sword and Shield, Dhelmise. In that video, we covered that it could be found in a few select areas on Route 9, 1% of the time in any weather. So finding one before we can even catch it is already tough enough. To make it even harder on us, this Pokemon shares the same catch rate as Mantine, an impressively low 25. No wonder this thing's at number 3. Dhelmise is tough to find and tough to catch. What makes this even worse is that unlike Mantine, Dhelmise is not a water Pokemon, so there's no benefit from net or dive balls. On top of that, if you're not in the post game, the only areas affected by your internal clock will be the wild areas, making Dusk Balls also difficult to use. Zacian and Zamazenta, the 2 games box legendaries, get reined in the number 2 slot for one reason: catch rate. Among all the catchable Pokemon in the game, these two hold the lowest catch rate of 10, making them by far a challenge. When doing these calculations to determine placement by catch rate and spawn chance, these two Pokemon were actually set to be a 100% guaranteed spawn for the sake of calculations, and still placed above every other Pokemon on this list due to sheer catch rate alone. These are by far probably the most deserving of being the hardest Pokemon to catch, but as luck would have it, there is one technicality that the number 1 slot has that pushes this out of the water. But before we move on to the hardest to catch Pokemon, we do have a few honorable mentions. Farfetch'd, being one of the more painful Pokemon to evolve, is also a little annoying to catch. With a catch rate of 45, a 5% spawn in Giant Smear during Overcast, and a 5% chance to spawn on Route 5 in any weather. This feathery friend is as hard enough to catch that it almost made the list, if not for the other Pokemon available. Another set of Pokemon to mention are Sock and Sword and Throw and Shield. These two share the 45 catch rate with most Pokemon on this list, and like Farfetch'd, can be found in Giant Smear during Overcast, albeit at a higher spawn rate of 10%. Another location where these two can be found is Modest Oak Outskirts during any weather 5% of the time. Again, hard to catch Pokemon, but just not enough to make the cut. Now, like a few spots on this list, this is not a single Pokemon, but instead, unsurprisingly, a single mechanic. We're talking about promotional or event max raid battles. The single largest factor that has this beat out box legendaries is that you get one Pokeball throw and that's it. Heck, you might not even get to that throw if the den boss is tough enough to delay the turn limit. Now, the reason I specify the promotional raids over any normal raid is because when during a normal or Gmax raid, if you're playing solo or you are the host, your catch chance is 100%. This is not the case in promotional standard or promotional Gmax raids. In the promo standard raids, the Pokemon you encounter will take on its species-based catch rate, where in promo Gmax raids, playing solo or as a host will get you a catch rate of 20, and playing as a guest will put your catch rate as low as 3. 3. That is in line with Kyogre, and on top of that, you only get 1 throw. The chances of actually landing that catch is absolutely abysmal. Also, on another note, there are a few select Pokemon that were actually removed from the normal list. Both Lapras and Duraludon would have had places earlier in this list, but were instead moved here, as it is likely people would be going after these Pokemon for their G-Max forms, meaning their catch rates would be reflective of max raids and not other wild encounters. This also helps as it showcases some other Pokemon that are also hard to catch. Well, that pretty much wraps up the top 10 hardest Pokemon to catch in Pokemon Sword and Shield. I haven't tried to catch all these Pokemon yet, but I can tell they would be really hard if I try my luck at any of them. And with how bad my luck is, well, you can pretty much see that. What about you guys though? Did you have any problems catching any of these mons on the list? And do you have any problems with Gigantamax raids or Dynamax raid Pokemon? Let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, why not leave a like and subscribe to my channel with notifications on, that way you never miss an upload. If you want to support me further, consider following my Twitch where I stream a lot of Pokemon content and all kinds of other Nintendo content like Zelda, Fire Emblem, and much more. Also, I've been reviewing every episode of My Hero Academia Season 4 over on MysticSage, so head over there if you're into that too. I would love that a lot. Want to support me further and gain cool perks? Check out my Patreon. Daniel Leone, Lady Crimson, Memory Martin, The Lazy Leo, Matthew Young, Awesome Lego, Jarrett Weiss Austin, Sudden Grider, and Enigma97 did, and I want to thank them personally for going above and beyond. It means the world to me. I think I'm gonna wrap this up though. I'm Mr. Gumbrand, and I will see you in the future for more awesome Pokemon content.